Welcome to Financial Repression Authority's Roundtable Insight, where the best fund managers, economists, and industry leaders discuss the key investment issues and challenges in the current macroeconomic environment.
Hi, welcome to FRA's Roundtable Insight. This is Richard Benuli. Today we have Jayant Bhandari. He is an institutional investor consultant who advises institutional investors about his findings as he roams the world looking for investment opportunities, particularly in the natural resource sector. Earlier, he worked for 6 years with U.S. Global Investors, a boutique natural resource investment firm, and for 1 year with Casey Research. Welcome, Jayant.
Thanks very much for having me, Richard.
Great. So we're going to continue our discussion on India since it seems to be an initial case on how some governments are now moving to a war on cash, if you will, and what the effects are on the economy, on the people, on society in general, as well as effects on commodities, the price of gold. So there's lots to explore. Earlier there was or recently a posting by Alistair MacLeod. I just wanted to read that he actually sees this potentially as a move towards fascism or totalitarianism, as you mentioned in your recent writings as well. So he said he thinks, though, that eventually it will all collapse. So he says eventually governments will destroy themselves following these political and economic policies because the states and their experts delude themselves that they understand economics. They do not wish to understand the reasons why markets free of government interference lead to prosperity and why government micromanagement always ends in tears. And he says, continues on, banning cash will almost certainly speed up the decline of an electronic currency's purchasing power because its public rejection has the potential to become instantaneous. Just watch how the cashless rupee behaves. Any thoughts on that, Jayant?
Richard, absolutely loved those statements. They are completely correct, and I totally agree with that. And I think India is going to completely and utterly fail in trying to make this country cashless. Firstly, they don't really have the competencies to make this country cashless. It's technologically an extremely backward country. Almost 1 billion people, I just said 1 billion people in this country do not have internet connections. Telephone, electricity is not proper, even in big cities. How is electronic transactions going to work in this country, which is extremely backward, incompetent, and chaotic?
I mean, didn't the government think about the rollout plan ahead of time, or was it just done overnight? Was there any planning on that?
Well, the statement that you read of Alistair defines the situation very well. But all you have to do is to multiply it by 100 times to make yourself understand how worse the situation in this country is. This is a country of GDP per capita of $1,700 per person. It's an extremely wretched and poor country. The government did absolutely no planning. So bad has been the planning that in the last 55 days since they announced demonetization, they have released about 70 notifications of changes. And these are real notifications. Every day they have changed how much money they can convert. You can convert when the banks would be closed, what you can do with your bank accounts, how much money you can deposit, what you can do with your money, what you can't do with your money. They just keep coming out with new notifications because they have to do massive patch-up jobs. Everything has been extraordinarily badly done. But the amazing thing is, Richard, that all they had to do was to print two currency notes. That's all they have done. 500 rupee banknotes and 2000 rupee banknotes. And they are extremely badly printed. There are errors on those banknotes. The papers have problems. The ink, it starts to smear on some of the banknotes. So imagine how thoroughly incompetent Indian government must be that they can't even print in a printing press properly.
Yeah. I mean, what happened? I mean, is that because they're rushing to print notes now, or why all the errors on the new currency notes?
Richard, you have to visit India to understand the chaos, corruption, utter and complete incompetence of the government of this country. You land in New Delhi, Mumbai, or Chennai, three of these big cities, and the moment the gate of the plane opens, a wave of chaos and corruption hits you. This is the way this country works. You start getting scammed by custom officers even before you exit the custom area, and then all kinds of hundreds of touts and scammers hit you.
Okay.
Now, corruption hits you on your face in this country. Now, remember, Richard, I am in India. I am in a big town. The problem is I don't know what is happening in this country 20 kilometers away from where we are. Wow. I just told you how bad incompetence and corruption is at the airports in big cities. Now then imagine what happens in smaller cities. Imagine what happens in tribal and rural areas. This is absolutely crazy, the whole situation.
Yeah, I think there's something like 650,000 like rural towns or villages there.
Right. It's like 500,000, millions of villages, rural places, tribal areas, tens of thousands of big towns. I mean, this is a massive country. And one person deluded himself, and I'm using the word of the statement you read at the beginning of our talk.
Yeah.
He has deluded himself into thinking that this one person who has been a bully all his life can manage to bring totalitarian control over this extremely chaotic and diverse country. It's not going to work out. It will, I think, break this country eventually.
And can we explore what's exactly happening in the economy? There's been reports, there was a recent article showing the rate of contraction in the Nikkei India Manufacturing PMI Index, showing how economic activity is beginning to fall precipitously. Can you expand on that with what you're seeing there?
Yeah, and those are really the numbers from the formal economy, Richard, and they are something that you and I pay a lot of attention to when we are trying to make money. My mom is very happy because vegetables are now available at half the price they used to be available at 2 months earlier. Now, the reason is that poor people just don't have the cash to buy anything. They don't have jobs. They are going desperate. So remember, about 80% of this country is wretched poor, and this is the population that works in the informal economy. They don't have jobs. They can't buy food. The food prices have fallen. The middle class is all happy. But remember, these are the people who are really the backbone of this country, of this society and this economy. When they lose jobs, they will be rioting. They will be creating crime problems. And then at the end of the day, formal economy sits on the back of the informal economy. Now, informal economy does not mean it's any criminal economy or there's anything wrong about that economy. It's just that these people earn $1 or $2 a day. They can't really make banking a part of their lifestyle. They don't really have the mental capabilities or time or patience to go to the bank every day to extract their daily wages.
And what is the effect exactly on sort of inflation, deflation? So it sounds like there's deflation in the prices of, like as you mentioned, the agricultural commodities. I've seen pictures of tomatoes just being thrown out into the road. So I guess there could be deflation in that sense, but would there not be also input cost inflation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, remember, Richard, yes, there's deflation in the short term, and my mom is happy because vegetables are half price now. But the reality is that these farmers will go bankrupt. Now, remember, I'm talking about 70 to 80% of India's population. These people will go bankrupt. I read a news just this morning that 12 people in a family killed themselves because they have been struggling with monetary issues related with this demonetization.
Oh.
This is daily problem in this country today. People are dying in these lineups. They are going bankrupt. Their businesses are failing. They're closing their businesses. So the next phase is that when the next cycle it starts, the farmers don't really have the money to plant the seeds anymore, which means that food production will very likely fall in the next cycle, in the next few months. Food prices will then go up, and then it will start hitting the middle class. It will then start hitting the formal economy. And formal economy, from what I know, is already very badly hit. Car purchases are down significantly. People are sitting on their money because they really can't do much with their money anyway, because government tax officers are so rapacious and so corrupt. There is so much anxiety and fear among small businesses and people who have saved their money.
And so what is the end result? Alistair goes on to say currency collapse could be the greatest threat to planned national socialism. During a currency collapse, a state's liabilities will rise along with everyone else's. Do you think that will happen?
Well, I don't really see a possibility of currency collapse just because government has the monopoly on the currency, and all the money that you have in your bank accounts, which is where all your money is today, is all frozen. So in a way, it's collapsed. It does not exist. So how can it collapse more? So currency collapse is not the problem. The biggest problem is that one person has monopoly on the blood circulation, economic blood circulation of the society, and this demagogue has completely destroyed that blood circulation of the society. Economy will suffer, and I think socially and culturally this society will face horrendous problems going forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're mentioning, you see totalitarianism, or as Alistair calls it, fascism. You see that sort of evolving from all of this?
Well, it has always been a totalitarian country, Richard. The institutions of liberty, the institutions that the British left in this country, very rapidly mutated to accommodate the underlying superstitious, tribal, and irrational culture of this society. So this has been a totalitarian country. But what I can say, Richard, is that it has increasingly become more and more totalitarian over the last 70 years. The institutions are crumbling and they don't work. And yes, we are sort of reaching the peak when this will be completely totalitarian. But again, it won't work. The only result will be massive chaos, massive problems in the society, and possible disintegration of India.
And not to mention, it appears the stock market, right, is going down as well.
Well, it has gone down over the last 3 months, certainly in US dollar terms, because not only the stock market is going down in rupee term, but the rupee is continuing to fall very slowly though. But Richard, remember that if you're invested in the stock market, you can't really take your money out. So you stay invested in the stock market. The reality is that foreign investors, when they start getting what India is actually doing, they might stop bringing their money into the country. They might start to realize that Indian stock market is expensive in the first place anyway. And the result will be that the stock market can very, very easily fall dramatically in this country. I think it was extremely expensive to start with. And now, because of this freeze that the government has put on people's cash, you have no use of that cash and you can't really generate productivity in this country. This country has been a negative yielding economy forever. And now they have destroyed the economic backbone of the country. So yes, indeed, the stock market can fall and should fall going forward.
And is some of the economy going towards more like bartering type methods?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of bartering are starting to happen in rural places where economies are not very complex. People have started to barter. They exchange their grains with vegetables and vice versa, and all kinds of bartering things. But really, Richard, money was developed to make our life easier. And the transaction cost of bartering are huge.
Yeah.
And it creates massive anomalies in the economy. And it does not work in a more sophisticated environment when you are doing proper businesses and exchanging modern goods. What I think will happen eventually, and I hope it does happen, is that people start exchanging gold in place of cash eventually to do bigger transactions. I hope it happens because government's monopoly on cash, fiat currency, which is backed only by regulatory edict, is absolutely disastrous and extraordinarily risky for the society, any society.
So what is happening to gold? Is the government now targeting gold? There's reports of houses being raided, no questions asked, confiscating jewelry. Is that happening? And what is happening to the price of gold as well?
Well, it is becoming a police state, Richard, very rapidly. The government authorities knock your door, and you better let them in because there is this strange amount of strange chronic fear among people in the society. So yes, raids are happening. What government has done is that it has told people that any married woman owning more than 500 grams of gold might be assessed for tax. The problem is that how do you prove to the government that your great-great-great-great-grandmom gave you some gold? So if you have a kilo of gold that has been passed on for the last 10 generations, you don't really have a receipt of it. You can't really prove that you earned that money. You can't prove that it was gifted to you, which basically boils down to one thing, that you pay unnecessary taxes and you pay a huge amount of bribe. So always remember, bribe is an inherent part of this society. You always pay a bribe, and corruption has skyrocketed in the last 2 months because now this is a police state, and in police state, you don't question the police.
And so what's the price now of gold in terms of the premium to the worldwide rate?
Gold price has did go up to close to $3,000 an ounce for a few days after the demonetization was announced, but now it has fallen to the international rate plus about 10%, and its Indian street price is about 10% more than the international price because there's about 10% custom duty on import of gold.
Okay.
Most of gold, of course, comes through smuggling channels, and these smugglers make a massive amount of money by smuggling gold.
And given the sort of current focus on gold, is there a movement, do you see, to other stores of value like silver or maybe Bitcoin?
So I keep hearing about Bitcoin. I don't really give much of my time in trying to understand Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin will become important for India or something like that to enable Indians to move their money outside the country. There will eventually be a huge amount of interest among Indians to move their money outside the country. The reality is Indians have been very inward looking. It's a big country, so people are very inward looking. But now, for the first time, I see more and more people asking me questions on how they can move their money outside the country. How can they keep their gold outside the country? So this will become increasingly common going forward.
Is that difficult to do in terms of, are there current capital or exchange controls in place in terms of rules of, maximum amounts that any given Indian citizen can wire transfer out of the country, for example?
Yes, there are restrictions, but you can still transfer about $250,000 per family outside the country, or something like this, Richard. It's
Okay.
very difficult to keep track of all ever-changing rules in this country.
Yeah.
But I think government will almost certainly institute capital controls, and it will almost certainly put some restrictions on gold ownership sooner rather than later, because they have to plug the loopholes. If they don't do it, people will buy gold using their credit cards and debit cards, or they will move their money abroad using foreign exchange channels. So government will remove those possibilities in the near future. My advice to Indians, of course, is move some of their money outside the country as soon as you can.
I see. And what about inside the country? Could there be means of maybe just buying some silver or going into farmland, perhaps?
Well, that's what people have historically done. That is exactly why people buy so much gold, silver, and farmland and properties. And Indians will do that, continue to do that going forward. They have got to protect their wealth from these rapacious, corrupt people who run the Indian government.
And so where does this all end? How do you see this evolving over the next few months?
So, Richard, I think India was never really growing at 7.5%, the often claimed number. My eyes don't tell me that story. And I extensively travel in India. As I said, I have been in India for the last 2 months. Indian economy is stagnating. People are hugely indebted. And I think this country continues to be an extremely irrational and tribal country, which means that technology, that free gift of technology that they got from the West, hasn't been used up properly. Food habits have gone very bad. Disease is growing rapidly in this country. There are huge amount of chaos in the society. People are noisy, pollution, garbage everywhere. I don't see a very good future of the country. I think this country will start to disintegrate in a few years' time. Regional problems will keep going up. There are black swans all around this country right now. Because Modi has triggered a lot of black swan events by this demonetization, it will, I think, eventually disintegrate the country.
And in your travels around the world, do you see any similar type of trends in other countries? Actually, the Financial Times recently reported that China has curbed gold imports in the wake of government attempts to clamp down on capital leaving the country, according to traders and bankers. So that's in China. What about other countries? Any thoughts on that in terms of the trends you see?
Well, what I said about India is very similar things are happening in the rest of South Asian countries. Mm-hmm. Almost the same and worse is happening in the Middle East. Much worse is happening in Africa. I think these 2.5 billion people are in complete chaos right now. All these countries are unnatural countries. They are tribal people, and these societies have a natural organic inclination to become tribal again. So their institutions must become tribal again. And I think a lot of these countries will change their shapes over the next few decades, and they will go through major problems. Now, you and I worry a lot about what's happening in the West, and West has its own problems because they are becoming increasingly totalitarian. But the problems of the emerging markets, particularly South Asia, Middle East, Africa, and a lot of South America, in my view, and I travel to all these countries, is extremely, extremely high and bad.
Wow. We live in interesting times. Jayant, how can our listeners learn more about your work?
Richard, I have a website, jayantbhandari.com, and I post all my articles, talks, and about my investment ideas on my website.
Excellent, great. We'll have to continue discussion in the coming weeks and months to see how it evolves.
Absolutely, Richard, and I'm very keen on seeing what happens in India going forward, if nothing else, just for the philosophical purposes and to understand human behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Thank you very much, Jayant. Great discussion, as always.
Thanks for the opportunity, Richard.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
The FRA Roundtable Insight Show is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a solicitation or offer to purchase or sell any securities. The investments, investment strategies, and investment philosophies discussed or presented on the show each involve their own unique risk factors which are not discussed on the show. Any discussions among the panel participants or responses to listener inquiries are based on the personal opinions of the panel participants and do not take into consideration the listener's suitability, objectives, or risk tolerance. Please be advised that you invest or speculate at your own risk.